Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be reviewing, configuring, and using Swagger UI. Now, I've mentioned before the importance of having well-documented APIs. They do act as a guide to persons who would consume the API, and it tells them how it's used, what to call when they want what kind of information. And so Swagger does an excellent job of creating documents or helping us to create documents. As a matter of fact, it helps us to auto-generate documents based on what we've developed. And so we're going to use this time to integrate it into our API. Right now, we only have one endpoint, but then, we'll put in the Swagger, look at it with one endpoint, and then put in something else, and then just look at how everything just gets generated for us. So to get started, we have to include Swashbuckle. So Swashbuckle is Swagger's .NET library, pretty much. So to do that, we're going to use a tool called NuGet. So we just right-click our project, and then we go down to Manage NuGet Packages. Once that loads up, it's a window that's going to show us a bunch of packages. So packages are like libraries that have functionality, right? So you download a package for a particular thing and you get a bundle of functions and functionality, pretty much. So you will see here, these are all of the ones that are already installed. So we want to browse because we want those that are not installed as yet. And I would advise that you click the include pre-release just in case that the version that you're using, version of .NET Core that you're using, the version of the library may not be included if you don't click include pre-release. So you want the latest library for the latest version of .NET Core. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and search, and I'm looking for Swashbuckle. So that's S-W-A, so that's S-Swashbuckle. All right. And then once we do that search, we will see a few results, and we're going to download the ones for ASP.NET Core. So that would be these three, right? These are the three we want Swagger, we want Swagger Gen, and we want Swagger UI. So to download it, you just need to hover over the line and you will see the down arrow. All right. So you just click that down arrow, and then it will connect to the servers, ask you to accept something, and then you let it do its thing. And then when it's successfully installed, you see that green arrow. So we've gotten that one. Let's get the next one, which is Swagger Gen. Let's download that one. Let it do its thing. All right, now we have that one too. And then the last one would be Swagger.ui. So we just download that one also. Now, after we've downloaded all of those libraries, if we go back to the installs tab, you would see them listed there. Of course, you don't want to clear the search so that you can see all of the libraries that you now have courtesy of NuGet. The ones with the blue up arrow are updates. So, you can come over to the updates tab. You can select all and you can update, but I'm not going to do that. Sometimes updates require you to make some major code changes, and I'm not going to go through that in this video or in this, lesson. So we can leave that until later, but the most important thing is that we have Swashbuckle installed and we just use NuGet for the first time. Anyhow, moving on, the next thing that we want to do is to set up some configuration. So as we would have discussed prior to this, the startup.cs file houses a bunch of configuration and initializers that are needed when our .NET Core application starts up. So of course, we want to include our new service or our new library, which is Swagger or Swashbuckle, into our middleware so that when the application starts up, it's aware that this is a service that needs to be included. So I'm going to start introducing it after I've initialized the database, but before I initialize my controllers. So sometimes order matters when you're initializing services. Sometimes you don't want to initialize this service before that one. I usually leave the add controllers for last because by the time I'm adding the controllers, everything else should have been in place. I hope that makes sense. So I just always say order matters. And if you can't bother or the order seems too, hard to understand, just leave this controllers one for last, pretty much. All right, so let us add Swagger services. So to start off, we're going to say services dot, and then you may not see it listed. Let me say add, and then after add, you say Swagger. There we go. Add Swagger Gen. So by including our libraries, we now have this new extension method. So add Swagger Gen, and then we're going to have to put in something like a Lambda expression. So we'll say token, I'll use C, and then an arrow, right? And open and close curly brace. So that's just a start. We're not finished at all. So services dot add Swagger Gen, open brace, and then your Lambda expression, your token, the arrow, and then open and close curly brace, close brace, or parenthesis, and then semicolon. So we're going to start filling out inside of the curly braces now with some information needed for Swagger Gen to be able to operate. So I'm just breaking the line, and I'm going to tab so that it looks neat. All right. And then I'm going to start off with my Lambda expression, which is the C, or Lambda token, which is C dot, and Swagger doc. All right. And then open brace, and then I'm going to semicolon again. So I'm just doing it line by line so that, it doesn't look mixed up by the time you try to reproduce it. Then we're going to start filling out some information about Swagger doc. So if I look at the function parameters for the Swagger doc function, it's asking for a name, and then it's asking for open API info. All right. So the name I'm going to give it is V1, as in version 1. This is the first version of the API. So Swagger doc actually does help with versioning. When you have more than one versions of the API, maybe at the basic version, and you have the advanced version, or you have a free version and a paid version, you can actually have Swagger generate separate documents based on that. But it's all up to your configuration. So this is the first version of the API that we're preparing to build. So I have V1, and then I'm going to say new open API info. Sorry, little typo there. Open API info, right? And then this is a new API info, open API info object, but I'm just going to initialize it here. And then inside of that, let me just close this parenthesis at the end, right? Inside of open API info, these are the data points. I just did control and space, and it's showing me all the data points that I'm allowed to fill out inside of this. So I can say title is equal to, and I'm going to call it my bookstore API. Or let me take out the my, that looks a bit too personal. We're trying to, prepare for a professional world. So bookstore API, and then comma, version, and I can say version is equal to V1, right? But then you see that you have a number of other things that you could fill in. You could just do comma. You can put in contact information, more of a description. So let me put in more of a description. So I'm just going to break line so that it doesn't look too jumbled. All right. Or sometimes I get obsessed with these things. All right. So I'm just breaking line, trying to make it all look neat. So don't type with me just yet. All right. That looks a bit better, right? So the next thing that I was going to put in was description. And then description, this is an educational API for a bookstore. All right. So that is step one to setting up our Swagger. So we added the service for Swagger, document generation. Pretty much that's what this function is saying. And then we're telling it that in generating the document, these are some static values that we need to have. So that's the title of the document, the versioning of the API and the documentation, and the description. All right, so next up, we're going to go over to our configure method. So that was the configure services method, right? That gets called by the runtime. Now we're going to the configure, which also gets called at the runtime, and it's used for the HTTP request pipeline. So the first thing I'm going to add for this section, and I'm going to do it right underneath this if statement, is app.use Swagger. All right, open and close brace. So I'm saying app, when you're about to run, please use Swagger. And then there's another line that I need where I have to say app.use Swagger UI. So remember that we downloaded 3 libraries, right? So Swagger Gen was the service. I'm saying use Swagger, and now I'm saying use Swagger UI, which is, well, UI is short for user interface. And then this one requires a little bit of the Lambda-like expression, similar to what we just saw. So I have to open and close parentheses, put in my Lambda token. I'm using C. You can use pretty much anything you want here, right? C is short for configuration in my head, but I'm not saying you must use C. The arrow, and then open and close brace, and then semicolon. So inside of the braces, we're going to say C dot Swagger endpoint, right? So you see IntelliSense is picking up exactly what we want to do. All right. And after we say C.Swagger endpoint inside of this, and you're going to have to type this very similar to how I'm typing it. We are going to have a / Swagger / again v1 / Swagger.json. All right, so that's probably one thing that you may not have much leeway with in terms of typing, and you probably do. You can probably make it a bit easier, but we can just leave it like that and just continue. And then comma, and then the name. So I'm just going to reuse the title that I had up here and put it as the name here. All right, so now we've told our application that we intend to use Swagger, so please load these libraries when the application runs, just in case. All right. Now let us try and see what difference this makes. So when I go to debug mode, our browser will load and go to the 404, sure. But then I want to see the Swagger documentation, so I can say / and the very path that I just put in, which was what? Swagger /v1 / Swagger.json. So when I do that, all right, so I'm getting this error, and I do know why. I do know why. So I'm going to go back to my project. All right. So the problem just now was because of the controller that I have for the API. So what happens is that if you have a public action in an API controller, but you haven't given it any REST attributes, and we soon get into what the REST attributes are, but the point is that it's just there. It's actually going to kind of compete with the Swagger, right? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to delete this controller. Right, so we had home controller. This was our experiment just to make sure that our API was working how we thought it would. So I'm just going to delete it, and then I'm going to add a new one. So I'm just going to right click, click add, go to controller, and then this time we're going to say I want an API controller with read-write actions. So this one is going to give us like a template now. So it's not a blank controller for us to fill in. This is a template, right? So I just click add. I'm going to call this one, well, I guess I can call it home controller again. So I'm just recreating home controller, but with auto-generated code. All right, and here we go. So you can see that this one looks a bit more colorful, a bit more lively than the previous one. And what I was saying about the REST attributes would be these attributes, data annotations, that are, well, annotations that are put above the action. So this is a get, that's a REST verb. Another get, that's a post, that's another verb. Put, delete. Those are all REST verbs. All right. So those are the REST attributes that they're talking about. So I'm going to try that again. I'm going to go back into debug mode without making any other change, but recreating my controller. I'm just going to go back into debug mode. All right. And we're back at our 404. So let me try that again. /swagger /v1 /swagger.json. And when I do that, now you're seeing, all right, some documentation, but then this obviously is not very decipherable. If you've never seen JSON before, this will make no sense to you. If you know JSON, then it still doesn't make much sense because now you have to sit down and study it. So to get to the actual Swagger UI, the beautiful user interface or the beautiful document that we're talking about, you would just take off everything and say /Swagger. So it's localhost : your port /Swagger. And once you do that, it will redirect to an index.html with a nicely generated document showing you all of your endpoints. So let me see if I can bring this down a little and bring it beside what we have in Visual Studio, right? So you can see the static values, bookstore API. This is an educational API for our bookstore. That's the description I put in. We have we have get, right? So we have the get function that would return all the values. And then that's found at API/home. So you see, it tells you get API/home, and you can drill down into it and it shows you some schematics about the function. So of course this can get far more advanced. It's a very basic, and it was auto-generated from basically nothing. So it's a good step in the right direction. They also show you that you have a get where you can say API/home/ID, which is a method that we have here. And then if we drill down into that, it shows you the description of the parameter that it expects and the possible responses. All right. So I'm not quite ready to start going into and explaining what each function is and how it works. Right now, we're just focusing on baseline configurations because we get these things out of the way to begin with, so that when we start our development, we don't have to double back and do these things again. Now, going back to our project and our startup.cs file, I can't stress it enough that documentation is very, very important. It's annoying, but it is important because if you provide a good document, then that reduces the need for people to reach out to you for support. So what we're going to do is increase the capabilities of the auto-generated document. So we're going to include what we call XML documentation, which is default in Visual Studio. Well, we have to enable it, but it comes in Visual Studio. But then Swagger can actually take advantage of it and include it in its beautiful documentation, right? So what we're going to do is go to the project, right click, go down to properties. And then inside properties, we're going to go to build. And once in build, we're going to do two things. The first one to me is this one where it says output path or output. I see XML documentation file. We just tick that. So what we're saying is that in the background, we want the project to keep its own document, right? And it will be in the form of an XML file. Also, once we've included that, we're going to start getting some warnings about, they need every single function to be documented. And I'm going to show you an example. So I'm going to make that change, save, and then go back to home controller. And then you'll start noticing that you're getting green lines under the class, under the name of the action. And if you hover over it, the function is saying, or the error, is saying, missing XML comment for publicly visible member. All right. So once you have a public property function or class, they expect that you're going to document it. And that's what that enabling that option meant. So when they say document it, they mean you put 3, that is a regular comment, right? But when you put 3 of those, it generates that summary. And then you see that that warning is now gone. All right. So if you do that over every single one, it kind of generates a summary where it says, okay, returns. Do you want to tell people what it returns? Do you want to give a description of this function or class, whatever it is? Right. So this is really cool. It kind of auto-generates it if you have a parameter. So I have an int parameter here. It's saying param name ID. So it's very cool. But the thing is that it can get annoying. It can get annoying, especially when you don't need to document every single public-facing property and function, right? So what we're going to do is double back to the same properties window and the build, and we're going to suppress the warning. So if we hover over the error, oh, well, I'm sorry. I thought it would show you the error number, but there's usually like a code associated with our, let me see if, there we go. So if you go down to error list, right? And then you look at the warnings that you're getting, you'll see that there's a number associated with the warning. So you see, just by enabling that, now it's expecting that I'm going to put that XML comment on every single thing that's public. And that's not practical because I don't need to document the startup file and those things. So what I want to do is suppress this warning code, which is 1591. So I'll go back to my properties window and you'll see this option that says suppress warnings. I'm already suppressing 1701 and 1702. I'm sure you are too, but we're going to add a third one, semicolon 1591. And then when I click save and go back to my controller, then you will see that those lines are now gone. And if I go to the error list, you'll see that there are no more warnings of that nature. So by suppressing the warning, it's pretty much saying that, okay, I won't annoy you with this one, right? But as we go forward, though, when we do our controllers, we're going to want to put in our summary documentation. Anyhow, let us continue with this configuration. So I did the change here to enable the XML documentation file. Back in my startup.cs, there's something that I need to do, and I have to go back up to the configure services function. And then after the lines where I set up Swagger Gen, I'm now going to tell it where it can find the XML documentation. I'm sorry, no, it's not under, it's inside of, right? Sorry. So it's inside of here that I'm going to continue documentation. So I'm still inside of the curly braces from add Swagger Gen. We did the Swagger Doc stuff, and then under the Swagger Doc stuff, I'm going to continue. So I'm going to declare something and say var xpath. Xpath for me is short for, xfile is short for XML file, right? You can write XML file if you want, that's fine. And then I'm going to write out a very complicated looking path here. So I'm going to use interpolation. And then what I'm going to say is, so I have $, open and close quotation marks. Inside of the quotation marks, I have my open and close brace. And then I'm looking for assembly, right? Dot get executing assembly. So IntelliSense will help you along the way, and that's a function. Dot, and then I'm getting name, right? Dot, and that's also a function. And then I say dot name. All right. So this is basically saying get the executing assembly. So this is me getting the path where the project sits. So this is a very dynamic way. So I could have written out the literal name for the project, but then that would be unique to the project, and I would have to do that every single time I have a new project. So by doing it this way, I'm just saying what is the path and the name of this project, right? And then I just want all of that appended to the extension .xml. So you will find an XML file by this name wherever it is, right? So it's just a nice dynamic way of finding that XML file. So by enabling this, you would see that this is the path. It generated an XML file with the same name as a project. So that's all that we were doing right there. Instead of trying to type out all of this as a static thing, we're just being dynamic. So you can copy and paste this line in as many projects as you will have once you've enabled that function for the XML documentation. The next line we say xpath, var xpath is equal to path dot combine path.combine, and then you see I'm getting the red lines here. So that means I need to include a library. So I can just go to the red line, hold on Alt, press Enter, and then I will get the suggestion under the light bulb. So it's saying I need to include system.io. Once that's done, that's fine. So if you get red lines, you just need to hover over them, hit the light bulb. It will tell you what library you're missing. So path.combine, and inside of the parentheses, I'm going to say app context dot base directory, right? comma X file. All right. So after making these two lines, so I'm just getting the XML file path pretty much. Then I'm going to say c dot include XML comments. And then I'm telling it that you can find the comments at X path. All right. So whatever we put into the summary section of any function or file that we have, it's going to go into that XML file that we see being generated, having included XML documentation file. And then we're saying that when Swagger is generating its documentation, it should take into account the contents of these files. So I'm going to put in two summaries. This is a test controller or test API controller. And then this one is just going to say gets values. This one is going to say get a value, right? So I'm just putting in some stuff. And then one more change that we're going to make to Swagger is a line under Swagger UI. So under Swagger UI, after we've defined the JSON file, I'm going to put one more line there to say c.route prefix is equal to, well, just open and close quotation marks. All right. So this is going to make it come up on the startup. So, when we go into debug mode, instead of it going into the, where we have to browse to get there, it should come up on the first page. So let's see if that works. And voila. So I just went into debug mode, and the first thing that came up was our Swagger document. And if you take a closer look, you'll see that some of the documentation or some of the comments that I had put in for the actions are there, right? So I said gets values, right, for that one, and get a value. Well, it should be gets a value. Sorry about that. But yeah, the point is that it works, right? So that is how we set up Swagger. And once again, it's very important that we maintain these documents. There are a number of other attributes that we'll be adding along the way, and you will just see how Swagger will envelop them and include them in the documentation and make it easier for us to share our API's secrets with others.